that because they believe that government is unnecessary. Let's go on to the definition of valuable. They said that we understand as the proposition that anarchy isn't practical and can never be implemented. Then, ladies and gentlemen, why is it valuable? If you think that is something that is idealistic, not valuable. If you value something, you would like to use it. You see merits in it, and you want to. Yes, go ahead.
But isn't this question actually regarding political ideology
and
not political practicality?
Thank you. Political ideology. Political ideologies are something you stand for. It's something that you believe in as a person, and that's how you vote when you go in a democratic society. That's how. No, thank you. And political ideology is not something that you just believe in. And to say, or it's something you believe in, but to say that it's out there and someone believes in it, and so you can take from it is not enough, ladies and gentlemen. Someone has to be an anarchist. Someone has to stand up for the party of anarchy, which doesn't make sense because anarchy is a lack of government. No, thank you. So to say that this political ideology can exist without being implementable is absolutely insane. For that reason, we suggest that the definition should be to have admirable qualities and to be realistically implementable. Now, let's go on to this idea of political ideology. They said that again, it's a belief, and you don't have to stand for it. You just have to understand and recognize that it exists. Ladies and gentlemen, how does that make sense? How can you have anarchy if no one stands for it and no one believes in it? For that reason, we believe that political ideology will be a set of doctrines that are the basis for a political system. That is why political ideologies exist, so that we can enact a political system. Let's move on to address their contentions. The first idea was this idea that anarchy gives this idea of equality of opportunity, and that we understand that government is an elitist body. However, ladies and gentlemen, this is not true. There's going to be different classes in all societies, whether it's anarchist or if there's a government in place. And to say, no thank you, and to say that the government is a body of elitist people is wrong in today's modern democratic world. We elect our leaders, and we elect the people that we would like to see in power. For that reason, no thank you. The people can have the power to say whatever they want for their government. Let's move on to their second contention, which is this idea that governments can learn from anarchy. Ladies and gentlemen, how can a government learn from a political ideology that doesn't want government? That is completely absurd. Why can you learn from the opposite of what you're trying to enact? That doesn't make sense. That is not a good enough logic, no thank you, to prove why we should learn from this. And they say, oh, it's a source of opposition. But there's no opposition, ladies and gentlemen. Anarchy doesn't exist. There's no person standing for it and saying, I believe in it. No, thank you. For that reason, we cannot believe in it, and we cannot use it as something that governments can learn from because it doesn't exist. Let's move into our case and this question of, how do we really measure this debate? What are we really talking about today? We believe that our yardstick, how are we going to measure this, is that we must prove to you judges that the government is necessary and desirable, while the burden laying for the proposition is to prove that the lack of government is beneficial and realistically implementable. No, thank you. Now let's go on to a policy. How are we going to enact this? How do we make sure that government will always do its job? No, thank you. While anarchy will fail. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we denounce anarchism and we commend the merits of democratic government. Let's move on to our two contentions. We have, no thank you, two today. Our first contention is that government produces compromise, which I'll spend the majority of my speech expanding upon. And then our second contention is that anarchy inevitably leads to conflict, which my second and third speakers will spend their speeches expanding upon. Again, our first contention, that government produces compromise. To understand why we have government, we need to understand humanity. So let's understand humanity, ladies and gentlemen. Humanity, man is self-interested. Man will always work in its self-interest. So if man will always work in its self-interest, it's going to find people to work their self-interest together. That's what we call, people form groups called factions. They believe, they find people with common ideologies because people want to get what they want. And people are self-interested, so they will form these factions. So if we are forming these factions, we need a forum and a body for these factions to come together and to work it out, to say, I want this and I want this, and there's going to be a lot of conflict, and we need a form of government. This is why government was created. Government is this forum for factions to fight it out with each other to produce compromise. This is why government is so important, because we understand that people have goals. People are self-interested and want to raise themselves in society. So if these factions come together, they cannot just, if anarchy existed and we had no form of government, factions would just fight on factions, no thank you, and you can't. And so factions would be fighting faction, and there's no place for the compromise, and that anarchy would lead to conflict, which goes into our second contention. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had government from the birth of humanity. Let's go back to Mesopotamia, where government existed, all the way to modern society, where governments today flourish and exist. Government is so important because it works, ladies and gentlemen. Anarchy has never worked and succeeded, and for that reason, we must stand today for government and not for anarchy. It is so important to realize that government is important in today's modern world because we live in a globalized world. Ladies and gentlemen, we need things like natural resources to exist, and those natural resources are owned by governments. My second and third speaker will go on to expand upon this idea in the second contention. But ladies and gentlemen, anarchy is not something we can stand for today because it doesn't exist, and government is something that is real and implementable. Thank you.
The next team has 1 minute to approach the podium.
Judges, the time was 6:14.
Forty-five seconds.
Judges, are you ready?
May I start? Ladies and gentlemen, I feel the need to remind you of the topic which we are discussing today. Let me repeat, we are discussing the contention that the House believes that anarchism is a valuable political ideology. We are not arguing that anarchism should be implemented. We are not arguing that governments should be dissolved. We are arguing that anarchism is a political ideology and it is valuable. Now, first of all, I would like to rebut some of the contentions and claims that the opposition has made, as well as reaffirm our contentions. Firstly, they contested our definitions, all of our definitions, of anarchy, valuable, and ideology. I choose to stand by those definitions. But however, I would like to particularly go back and argue with their definition, the redefinition of valuable. They seem to believe that if an ideology is not practiced, a government cannot draw from it. First of all, we never stated that that anarchism would not be practiced. Hang on a second. First of all, we never stated that anarchism would not be practiced. We simply stated that it cannot be implemented by governments. People can practice it, but the government is never going to become an anarchist government. Accepted?
Would you agree that there's a difference between a philosophy and an ideology?
There are differences, but for the purposes of this debate, they are the same. We believe that, yes, there are people in this world we are talking about for the purposes of our debate. There are people who believe in anarchy, but they will not ever become the government. Accepted?
So why do you create things that you know will not work realistically?
We create them because we believe that we can learn from these ideologies, which, by the way, is the argument we are discussing. Now, an example of an ideology which may not necessarily be easily implementable and yet is still extremely valuable is religion. I am not going to go very far into this because it's a topic of extreme contention and it is not particularly relevant to this topic. But we are all aware that there are atheists out there who do not believe in religion. We are all aware that these people do not believe in God. However, they can still draw lessons from religion because religions do not because religion does not simply entail belief in God. Religion entails moral codes and things such as that. Atheists can draw from that. They can be moral people as well without needing to believe in God. Accepted?
Wouldn't you agree that there's a difference between that analogy because religion actually exists, whereas anarchy has never succeeded in the real world?
Religion exists, however, in which the primary doctrine of religion is that there is a God, and we are not quite sure if that exists or not. Now, secondly, therefore, the only contention that they have detailed so far is that governments are necessary because they provide compromise. Firstly, again, I must state, we are not arguing for the dissolution of government. We are arguing that anarchism is a valuable political ideology from which governments can learn. Now, they also state that anarchism inevitably leads to conflict. And yes,